Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're hearing me clearly. I know there's been some sound issues, so I hope that you can hear me clearly now. So welcome to the storytelling session. Now, the purpose of this session, I'll be guiding you through, is to help take your brilliant ideas and the important insights that you've gained from this event and create immediate and lasting change. So putting all of these ideas into action in a way that creates lasting change for the people that you want to improve the lives of. And this is an interactive session. It's going to be a practical session. So I encourage you all, please have a notebook at the ready. I'll come back to that in just a moment. And also please be in the chat box. I put down a little note in there to share with us your favorite movie. The reason being, I'll be sharing with you the science of storytelling. And if I can share this with you in a way that is meaningful with movies, stories that you care about, then you'll see that the science of storytelling has been impacting you for many years. So let's take a look at what we've got down here in the chat box. Some of my favorite movies already mentioned. So we got Robin Hood, Shawshank Redemption. That's one of my favorites as well. I'll come back to these a little bit later on. Black Panther, I watched recently. Excellent movie. And let's see if we can get some more down there. Pride and Prejudice. I will be coming back to some of these movies a little bit later on. Bad Boys is coming up. Now, don't be shy. Don't feel like you have to go with intelligent movies. You can have action movies, comedies, romantic comedies, whatever you'd like to pop down. I see Casablanca coming in there as well. Great. So I'll keep a check on those as they come through. Now, as you would have heard, or hopefully heard in the introduction there, my name's Richard. I am the founder of UK Body Talk. And I've been running this company now for 20 years. We train people all the way around the world, across Europe, the Middle East, Asia, America, Australia, going into Africa recently. And so the good news for all of you is that we know that this strategy is tried and tested we work with 10,000 people a year in small group coaching events and many more in conferences. So we know that these strategies work for different cultures, different organizations, different nationalities. But one thing that this has given me, and I'd like you to put a yes in the chat box if this resonates with you, is that over these 20 years, I'll work at about 100 conferences per year, whether that's a live event or more recently online events. And the biggest challenge that I find happens is that I know there is months of organization that goes into every event. So much time and money and thought and consideration and refining what's happening behind the scenes that many attendees don't even realize is happening. And then there can be great ideas shared, really powerful speakers, intellectual debates, great discussions, good distinctions made. And then often I'll go and I'll speak at that same conference a year later and I say, what changed? In the last 12 months, what changed? And so many times, the conference organizer and the people running that company or the community I'm speaking to will say, actually, not much. When we left this event, we went and we had other priorities. We had different things we had to deal with. We had so many great ideas, but not much happened. Or maybe you tried to engage people after that event, engage your team, your community, your nation with those ideas. And you weren't able to captivate them in a way that they took action. So if that's ever happened to you, if you find that sometimes there's so much invested in an event, great ideas, but not much happens afterwards. If that's ever happened to you, not from this event necessarily, but other events, just give me a yes down in the chat box if you've noticed that. Because that's often where my company and myself as well, I get booked to come in to say, let's make sure as much action is taken as possible, where people are taking these ideas forwards and captivating people outside of the event to make a greater impact. Great. I'm also seeing some good mentions of movies down here. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I've been watching that many times with my kids. Railway Children, Wizard of Oz, Shrek. Fantastic. Okay, so the good news for all of you, if you've experienced that challenge sometimes from events, is there is a simple system that you can use to take your favorite ideas, the biggest breakthrough insights that you've had from this event, and then put these into action by making them concise and compelling using the science of storytelling and applying that to emails, applying it to documents and meetings and presentations that you give to move these ideas forward and put things into action. So I'll be sharing with you how you do this in 3 simple ways as we go through this session. Firstly, I'm going to speak very briefly about the fundamentals of storytelling. Secondly, I'll share with you the system, and for that, you're going to need your notepad with you. And thirdly, I'll give you some different examples. I'm going to relay all of this back to the favorite movies that you've mentioned there in the chat box too. So in order to get ready for this, please do grab a notepad. And what I'd like you to have is that you need to have 4 boxes on the page, 4 boxes. And at the top, just write down, I'm sure that you've got many ideas that have come up from this event, so many different things that you've taken away. Just jot down one idea that you want to take forward, that you want people to take action on as soon as you get back to speak to your team, to speak to your community. What is that one idea you're determined to share with them to take action on? Just jot that down at the top of the page, and we'll come back to this in just a moment. So now then, it may be useful for you if you want to get some inspiration. Share that idea in the chat box. What is the one thing that you're determined to immediately take action on, even if you've got 20 ideas that you're taking away from this, determined to act on and to create a great impact with? What is one idea that you're putting into action? Put it in the chat box to help inspire other people. Now then, let's get into the first section, which is the fundamentals of storytelling. Fundamentals of storytelling. All stories need 3 things. All stories need 3 things in order to captivate our attention from the beginning all the way through to the end. And if a story has these 3 elements, even if it's not a great story, you may find yourselves sometimes, you flick on the TV, it's late in the evening, you can't be bothered to flick channels, and you see a terrible movie. It's rubbish, but you find yourself watching it for another hour and a half because it's done 3 things correctly. It's engaging your attention. You have to see how the mouse and the fish become friends at the end because something has been set up in the stories. I'm sure you've all experienced this. All great stories need 3 things. See if you can put it down in the chat box what you feel those 3 things are. 3 things great stories need. And it is not a beginning, middle, and an end. So many people get this wrong. A sentence has a beginning, middle, and an end. The title of this event has a beginning, middle, and an end. A loaf of bread has a beginning, middle, and an end. That isn't it. That's not a story. That could just be a list. So pop it down in the chat box. 3 things that great stories need. So let's take a look. Oh, you've got some good ideas that you're sharing down here, things that you're going to put into action. Anne is saying she's going to build a network of networks, hopefully from delegates, organizations here. Fantastic. So great stories. I'm going to see if you're going to get these 3 things they need. Firstly, we need characters. Got to have characters to create a story. Secondly, there needs to be a challenge of some sort. The reason being, if life is good at the beginning of the story and then life is good in the middle, life is good at the end, it's not a story. It's just a list. It's boring. So we need characters facing some kind of a challenge, and then there is a journey that they go on to overcome that challenge. So I want you to remember this as you leave this event, that you are the storyteller. And as the storyteller, you need to decide, okay, what's my one idea I'm going to go and persuade people about to take some action on? What they need to know from you is, what is the challenge? You need to describe that in the best possible way. The second thing is, think about who you're speaking to. They are the characters that you want to have supporting this challenge. So they need to know, okay, how are they involved in moving this challenge forwards? And then finally, you've got to describe that journey in a really compelling way so that they believe in the journey and those characters take on the challenge and go on that journey with you. So that's what all stories have. And you can take a look at all sorts of different movies. So let's take a look at Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I've watched that 10 times with my kids recently. What you get is a group of characters who all think that they're Spider-Man in different elements of the universe. And they have a challenge to get rid of the bad guy. And they go on a journey to overcome that challenge together. If you take the Shawshank Redemption, so you have characters there, And so inmates in a prison, they're facing a challenge of feeling trapped, but particularly Morgan Freeman, who has lost hope. And there is a journey to overcome that challenge to where Morgan Freeman finds hope again at the end of the movie. So characters facing a challenge and they go on a journey to overcome this. I'll come back to some more of your movies a bit later on. So how do we do this? How do you take that into some kind of framework that's going to make sense? Because I've seen, spoiler alert, John, if you haven't seen Shawshank Redemption. So how do you take action on this in a way that you can create a compelling story for your next meeting, for your next Zoom call or video call or next email? The way that you do this is by creating a grid just like this. So do take one page of your notebook and divide it up into these 4 boxes. And then what I'd like you to do is to write the word pro at the top of each box, pro. I'm going to teach you this pro storytelling system. Really straightforward to use. You just need the word pro at the top of every box. So I'll guide you through it. So let's start off with these top 2 boxes, nice and simple. To engage anybody with anything, we need to take the 2 most important driving forces that work on all people at all times. So once again, in the chat box, see if you can guess what these are. The 2 forces that work on all humans at all times that compel us to act. These 2 are very simply pain and pleasure, or more importantly, the need that we all have to avoid pain and to gain pleasure in some way. And so humans are being influenced to act based on these 2 things every day. And so let me give you a simple example around this. If you go back many thousands of years, back to the day of saber-toothed tigers. So let's imagine a very simplistic version of the science here, where you've got people who are trying to survive, and some of them are good at avoiding pain and gaining pleasure. So some of them see a saber-toothed tiger coming towards them and they think, that looks like pain. I want to avoid the pain and gain the pleasure of safety. And they run in the other direction. Other people, they weren't so good at pain and pleasure. They'd see the tiger, think he would look friendly, give him a hug, and those are the ones who got eaten. So we were essentially evolved from people who were very good at avoiding pain and gaining pleasure. So if you can use those 2 elements, you can compel anybody to listen to any message that you give. And that's what we're going to do in these top 2 boxes. Talk about pain and pleasure. So if we go to our first box, this top pro box I've got in red over here, this is the problem box. The problem box. This is where you describe the saber-toothed tiger. So write problem down in that box. Now, the key to doing this is that you need to describe in storytelling terms the negative now, and then a negative future. That's what happens at the beginning of all compelling stories. So let's say that, there's so many stories that you'll come away from this event with of examples of challenges, and you'll know the difficulties that you're facing with your own community, your own organizations in handling these challenges. And so you can describe to people the negative now. And maybe some of them know what that negative now is, where you're describing these are the challenges that we're dealing with right now. But most people stop there and move on to a solution. It's too soon. What you need to do is to say, these are the challenges that we are facing right now, and then move to the future and say, if nothing changes, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, this is where we're going to be. To get to the place where people think, I don't want that future. I will do whatever I can to avoid that future. So this happens at the beginning of stories where, to take a simple Hollywood movie, you get a guy at the beginning of a movie who his boss shouts at him and says, if you don't change your ways, you're losing your job. And then his landlord says to him, if you don't pay the rent, you're going to be homeless in 2 weeks. And his ex-wife says, if you don't turn your life around, then I will never let you see your children again. So he has challenges now, but ultimately in the future, those challenges will get worse unless change happens. So you see that in stories. It's important in day-to-day life. The one extra thing I'd encourage you all to do with the stories is to use these elements. So you have the problem. You can talk in that problem box there about M, T, and V. As you describe the challenge, you need to describe it in terms of money, time, and values. Money, time, values. So, of course, it's going to be straightforward, given the topic that you're all dealing with here, to talk about how these challenges that you're facing are affecting people's values and their humanity. We also need to think about, if this hasn't been fixed yet, well, what other challenges do we have in terms of resources? I heard earlier somebody mentioning a decrease in funding because of the pandemic. So there's other challenges you could talk about in terms of money and time, resources available to overcome this challenge, and values. How is this affecting our personal values? Final word to use in this box is ultimately, if nothing changes, if the funding goes down, if the time isn't given to this issue, this is how it will get worse. Now, when you've done that, what most people do is they go straight down here, straight down to box number 3. So you go problem, solution, problem, solution. I see this all the time, and it isn't compelling. And you'll find that people stop listening even though they care about the issue. Problem, solution isn't a story. What we need to do is to go over here to box number 2. So to give you a simple example on this, if I saw a saber-toothed tiger coming in this direction and I want to save you, just imagine I do problem, solution. Imagine I say to you, okay, there's a saber-toothed tiger coming in this direction. What I'd like to do is I'm going to share with you some PowerPoint slides now, some graphs, some spreadsheets and statistics on the caves in the area and our probability of survival in different caves. I'd like to share that with you now. You're going to think you're mad, you're crazy. What are you talking about? So instead, we don't want to go from problem down to our details and case studies and spreadsheets, which is what most people do. Instead, you want to go from pain to pleasure. So you can borrow a line from Arnold Schwarzenegger and say, look, there is a saber-toothed tiger coming in this direction. Come with me if you want to live. Come with me if you want food, shelter, and safety. I haven't told you how I'm going to fix it. I've just told you about a better future. So that's what we're going to do in box number 2 over here, is that you describe a better future. If you want people on board with your one idea that you're taking forward from this event, then make sure that you're doing this. Describe a better future. So the way that you're going to do this box is called the promise box. The promise box. So in the promise box, you can talk about money, time, and values, where you could say something along the lines of, for a very small expense and for a short amount of time, this is what we could achieve. And you're going to be saying it in the terms of what if. What if? Now, what do I mean by when I say what if? Don't guarantee something. That's not what the promise over here means. It doesn't mean I guarantee something. Just say to them, what if we could achieve this? Just imagine if we could. And by doing that, it puts them in their imagination into a more positive future. They are much more likely to pay attention to what you say next. So we talk about pain and what could happen if nothing changes. Then we describe a better future. And if that better future is compelling enough, they will listen to whatever you say next, no matter what it happens to be. Great. Now we're going to head down into box number 3, because if you've described these elements, you've said, we've got a challenge now, and ultimately it could get worse. What if in the next 3 months, what if in the next 6 months, we could achieve this through this investment that would make us all feel proud and have a huge impact on this community? What if we could do that? Now you need to get into the 3rd box, which is called the how box. The how box. This is where you explain how this is going to happen. So you're telling your characters how to engage and go on the journey. So in this box here, you need to write down process and proof. Process and proof. Process and proof. So that's how are you going to achieve this better future? You're telling the characters who are in your room, in your meeting, receiving your documents and emails, you're letting them know how this journey is going to happen. Now, here's the thing with storytelling. It's very important to remember. In box 3, that's where you're going to spend 75% of your time. You say to them, here's the challenges. It could get worse. What if there's a better future out there? You spend 75% of your time explaining to people how this is going to happen. And this is true of movies too. They set up the challenge and this better future of overcoming the baddie. That happens in the first 20 minutes. You then watch for an hour and a half people overcoming that challenge, going on the journey. So there's a rule in storytelling that they use that helps us overcome this. Put down in the chat box if you know what this is as soon as you can, so I can stay interactive with you. And I'm going to give you some hints and tips on this. How do they keep us compelled for an entire story? So I'll give you some tips. Aladdin, he finds a lamp, he rubs it, a genie pops out. How many wishes does he get that take us 2 hours through a movie to get through? And Goldilocks, going from the fairy tale. She goes into the woods, she eats some porridge. How many bears does she meet? How many musketeers are there? Just pop this down in the chat box so I know that you're still with me. What is the rule they're using in storytelling to keep us engaged through a massive journey to make sure that we stay there? They divide it into, not so much ups and downs, but they divide it into the power of three. Mark Scott was first off the mark there. Here we go. So the rule of three over here. That's what you need to be doing. Even if you've got 28 things that you need to tell people about, divide it into three major chunks. Three major chunks. So just like I did at the beginning of this session, I'm talking to you for about half an hour, but I said I'm going to go through fundamentals. I'm going to be sharing with you the system, and then I'll give you some examples. So that's the three things I'm doing. I'm doing 28 things, but I've divided it into three major chunks. So it's much more manageable. On our team at Body Talk, we have two people who present live every week on the BBC. So speaking to people from around the world, and they say the headlines are always three. It's always three headlines. Even if it's one story, the coronavirus, there's three major headlines that they'll be talking about to make sure you guide people through. Now, when you get to the end of this part, you describe this is how we're going to achieve the better future. At the end of this, you might want to recap, just very briefly recap. So you say, just to recap, the three major elements I talked to you about is step 1, step 2, step 3. Make sure they remember that, just like they do on the news. The beginning of the news, they say, here's the headlines, number 1, number 2, number 3. They then go through those three stories, and at the end of the news, they say, once again, tonight's main headlines, number 1, number 2, number 3. So that's what you're going to do. When you're in this box, when you're speaking to your team, your community, your country, that's what you're going to do down here. Finally, we need to move into box number 4. Now, I'm going through this quite quick because I know that you have a lot still to get onto for the rest of today. So into box number 4, here's what happens. Most people, they talk about the problem, they then give us this journey down here, and then they stop. They say, that's the details. I've given you my PowerPoint slides. I shared with you the case studies and the graphs. That's it. Do you have any questions? And at that point, people think, yes, I have a question. What do you want me to do? What should I do to get started on your great idea? And so every journey has a first step. Every journey has a first step. And that's what you put in box number 4. When you're describing your story, box number 4 is the first step. What do you want people to do today to start moving forwards with your idea? So we call this box the prompt, because you're prompting people into action and you want them to do it promptly, as in right now. What is one simple action that they could take now that would move your idea forwards? So it could be that what you want is a £15 million investment that's going to last the next 5 years. Maybe that's what you want. But if you ask for that at the end of the meeting, chances are they'll say, actually, no. Yeah, Francisco is saying there's 4 P's in my system. How does that work with the rule of 3? It's called the PRO system, P-R-O. So that's the little magic of this system. Anyway, what you want to do in that final box, if you want 15 million investment in resources for 5 years, just say to people, all we need to do before the end of next week is this one simple action. That creates momentum that moves the story forwards. That's all you need is one first step. Get them to agree to the first step before they leave the room or before they finish reading that document, and away you go. So that, in simple, is the PRO system. You're welcome to take a little screenshot of it if you'd like to, if I hold that there nicely for you. So take a screenshot if you'd like to. I'll be in the chat box after this, by the way, answering any questions. That's the PRO system. Just to finish us off, though, I want to just go back into some examples so you can see how you've heard this in action. You've heard this system in the last week probably 100 times, but you didn't realize it. It's on the radio, it's on the television, it's in books, it's in newspapers. You hear it all the time. So let me just give you, to finish off, a few final examples. To do this, what I'd like you to do is to pop down. Oh, I see, Francesca. Yeah, I get your message. What I'd like you to do now is to pop down into the chat box. What is the #1 movie at the box office worldwide of all time? The #1 movie at the box office worldwide of all time. It's not necessarily the best movie of all time, not as good as Casablanca, Pride and Prejudice that you've been mentioning down here, which again have characters facing a challenge. They go on a journey to overcome the challenge. but put down what is the number one movie of all time at the box office, and I'm going to come back to it. So 3 simple examples of where you've heard this day to day. And let's go first of all for adverts. Now I'm going to go for the cheapest advert that it gets created, and it's used in different countries. And I'm sure that you've heard this advert over and over again, but different versions of it. This is where they have no budget. They have a very poor actor, like not a great actor is what I mean, in a poorly fitting suit. They've got no budget, and they think the way to persuade people with our advert is to use the pro system. And so here's what they do. They start the advert and they say, have you had an injury at work? Would you like to get £25,000 in compensation? Well, now you can. They bring out their proof, which is Bob, and Bob says, yeah, I had an injury at work. I called them up on a no-win, no-fee basis, and they gave me £25,000. So if you're like Bob, go to our website today. That's how they do the pro system in 30 seconds, and then they get loads of people signing up. I'm not suggesting that you should sound like that. It's a very crass advert, but they do it because it works. Now let's talk about how they do this with, say, Apple iPhone launch. Steve Jobs did this all the time, exactly the same system for storytelling. So let's see what he did. He said, you know what the problem is? The problem is that currently phones are not very smart and they're very difficult to use. What if, he used this phrase a lot, what if there was a phone that could transform the way that you live? What if there was a phone that was super smart and so easy to use? It's called the iPhone. He said that it is a internet communication device, a phone, and a music player all in one. He spent 2 hours explaining it to us. And at the end, he said, pre-order yours today. They come out on June the 15th. And so he did this over the course of 2 hours. Now then, let me just see down in the chat box here. Who knows what the number one movie at the box office of all time is? It's not Star Wars. I wish it was. It is Kimoy Thomas. You get the prize. It is Avengers Endgame. And so they did this in the course of 3 hours, or I suppose they did it in 12 movies, but they did it in the space of about 3 hours in Avengers Endgame. There's 25 different characters. There's a lot going on, but here's what happens. The problem at the start of the movie is that half of the world is dead. Half of mankind is dead. And the promise at the start of the movie is, what if we could go back in time and bring them all back to life? And guess what? They divide up into 3 teams to go back to 3 moments of history to see if they can change the events and bring people back to life. So it's done in 3 hours. It's done in business. It's done day to day. It's on TV. You're going to hear it on radio all the time. So I encourage you, please, to think about now, what is one idea you're going to take away from this event and put it into action using this system and see how many people you can engage with this. My final tip for all of you, this has been a very short session. I wish I could have had 2 or 3 times as much time. So if you've enjoyed this session, but you want to learn more, then this is what I'd like you to do. You can go to info@ukbodytalk.com and put the subject podcast in that email. So send an email to info@ukbodytalk.com, subject podcast, and you'll get access to 8 podcasts that we have just been filming this last few weeks in the pandemic. You can also go to LinkedIn or Instagram @ukbodytalk and get much more information on storytelling that you can put into action to bring your ideas to life. And let's make sure we get a great impact coming out of this event. So if you want to ask me any questions, I'll remain on Hopin. I'll remain in the chat box. If you've got questions about how to use this, I'd be very happy to help. And I'm down there at Richard Newman. You can find me and you'll be able to connect with me on LinkedIn. But for now, I hope that was useful and I hope you enjoy the rest of your event. Thank you all very much.